Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn. I am so glad you found me. If you are not new here and you didn't watch my last video with my husband, then you don't know that we switched up the background. I'm bringing you in with me. It just feels more me. It just feels more cozy and intimate and like we're just hanging out. And I hope you guys like it. The last thing I wanted to do was do this true crime and do like this elaborate look when we're all at home, you know? I'm gonna jump right into it now because I've already rambled enough like I always do. Today's story is gonna be a long one, but it's so fascinating to me. So I just couldn't stop. I couldn't stop like watching documentaries, and I started watching like old biography, like, you know, like the old school like A&E biography style. I was getting so caught up in all of those, and I just have like pages and pages of notes on this. So this is a case that was over 100 years ago. It's a Lizzie Borden case. The more I kind of looked into it thinking things would make more sense, the more it just didn't. At the very beginning, I'm like, oh no, like cut and dry, she did it, like no questions asked. Now I've like wavered and gone a lot of different places, made excuses, then I kind of go back to being like, yeah, she did. I'm seriously all over the place. And I think that's why this story just enthralls people and just keeps them so captivated, because at this point, we'll just never know. Everybody who was involved, every piece of evidence, all of those things are gone now. So it truly is just always going to be a mystery, but that's kind of like the fun thing. You know that these are the ones that I love when it's just really a head scratcher, and then I love to hear all of your guys' theories. So that's why I wanted to do the Lizzie Borden case. Without further ado, let's get started. If you know nothing about the Lizzie Borden case, this is a story of a double murder that went down in Fall River, Massachusetts. Yeah. At 230 2nd Street, which was the Borden household. So the homeowner, Andrew Borden, and his wife, Abby Borden, were both bludgeoned to death with what people think was a hatchet. And at the time of the murder, there were only 4 people in the house. So that was Andrew and Abby, their housekeeper, Bridget, and Andrew's youngest daughter, Lizzie. Eventually, Lizzie was charged with murdering her parents, but she was acquitted. And to this day, there are so many people who think that Lizzie did it and got away with murder, and then you have a lot of other people who believe that an intruder could have committed these crimes and also got away with it. So Lizzie Borden was born Lizzie Andrew Borden. I kind of thought that was cool that her middle name was her dad's name. Nothing to do with this case at all, but my thoughts. She was born on July 19th, 1860 to Andrew and Sarah Borden. And Lizzie's father, Andrew, was like a descendant of a really prominent name. Like the Borden name was a big deal, but there was like different branches, I guess, of the name. So, you know, you could be part of a family and have like really, really wealthy relatives who have more money than you and you're related, but you just like don't. So that's like where he kind of fell, which has got to kind of be like a kick in the dick, because it's like you've got this really prominent name and relatives who are doing really, really well and living it up, and you're just like, oh, okay, I'm over here struggling. That's what Andrew had to deal with. So he ended up actually making a name for himself. He was a very successful businessman and ended up making a lot of money, but it was his money. Like he worked so hard, worked from the ground up, and just was so aware of every single dollar that he made. It was because of him. It's been reported that he started his business, you know, entrepreneurship in like the furniture business and like building caskets. And I don't know if this is true, but it could be like a rumor. There's so many that have, you know, evolved over all of these years. But I did read that because Andrew had worked so hard for his money, and he had already lived really poor and already struggled so much, he was really, really frugal. So he made sure to pinch pennies. He didn't like spend recklessly and just like flaunt his money around. He lived in a very modest house and a very modest area in Massachusetts. So like in the town, there were just different categories, I guess, almost like levels is kind of how I imagined it. So you've got like lower class on one level, and then in like the town, there was the middle class, and then up on the hill was the really, really rich and successful, where like his Borden relatives lived. So Andrew lived in that middle class area, even though he could have afforded to live on the hills. And what I read that was like a little like, oh, there's cheap and stingy, and then there's just, that's fucked up. And what I read that was a little fucked up was that he was so cheap that he would like make these caskets a certain size or buy them. Like he would have these caskets to sell to families that were certain size. And that, like, whatever he had in stock was in stock. Like, he wasn't going to be buying more unless he needed it and going to be, like, buying more materials to make different sizes. What was there was there. So if you didn't fit in it and you were too big, he would, like, cut off your feet. I don't know if I believe that. I think that could just be like an urban legend to just kind of make this story a little bit more juicy than it already is. Like it already has enough drama in it. But given how often you hear that he was really, really frugal, I don't know, I guess. Like that's a whole nother level of cheap. So that was one way Andrew made his money. He also made his money by being like a property investor. So he would have like tenants and buildings that he would rent out to. He also had commercial property, and he actually ended up becoming the president of the Union Savings Bank. So, I mean, he was doing really, really well in his later life. It said that in today's currency, he would be worth about $10 million, which in the 1800s was like $300,000. So Andrew ended up meeting Lizzie's mother, who was a lady named Sarah Morse. And Sarah was born on September 19th, 1823. And I couldn't find too much on Sarah. It's really hard to like kind of go back so far and not find really conflicting stories. Sarah's not really like that relevant to the story, but it kind of gives a backside into who Lizzie's mother is and like where she came from and the descendants and stuff like that. From what I could tell, Sarah was one of many children. In some reports I see like there was 12 of them, and in some of them it was 9. So I don't know if some of the children had like passed away and weren't accounted for like over the years, but she was one of many siblings. Now more than ever that makes a lot of sense because it's like you had nothing else to do but just be at home with your husband, with your kids. Now that we're trapped at home like 24/7 and can't really do anything to like entertain ourselves, well, it's like, oh, let's just have more kids. There's gonna be like a quarantine boom of babies in like 9 months. So that was what was going on in this time. And from what I could tell, there's like a lot of stigma to like the Morse name. They were described as like quite peculiar. A lot of people would be like, oh, the Morses are insane. And I could see that some reports about Sarah were kind of similar. A very peculiar woman, and she was known to kind of have a little bit of a temper. So she was very firm in what she really loved and very outspoken and open about things that she absolutely did not like. And I think back in those days, that was peculiar because as a lady, as a woman, you're just kind of taught to bite your tongue, roll with the punches, and you didn't really have like that much of a role to express yourself. But it's reported that like found her joy and happiness when she became a mother. She ended up having 3 children, all daughters. The first to be born was Emma Borden. And when Emma was around 5 years old, she had a little sister named Alice. Sarah kind of groomed Emma to be very maternal just from the get-go. Emma was really involved and excited to be a big sister and wanted to be very hands-on. So Sarah kind of taught her how to kind of be like a mini mom. Sadly, when Alice was 2 years old, she passed away to hypersyphilis, which is essentially, I guess from what I learned, quite common back then, but is very treatable now. And back in the day, it wasn't at all. Basically what it is a buildup of spinal fluid, and it causes pressure on the brain. So nowadays, there's technology to release that and treat it, but back in the day, a lot of little babies ended up passing away from this, and Alice unfortunately was one of them. About 4 years after Alice passed away, the Bordens tried again to have another baby, and they ended up having Lizzie. And as she did with Alice, Emma ended up taking on that maternal role with Lizzie and bonded really strongly that way with her. But unfortunately, another 2 years after Lizzie was born, their mother Sarah ended up passing away. She ended up dying from uterine congestion and spinal disease, and she was only 39 years old. When she was on her deathbed, she asked Emma to make a promise to her to take care of Lizzie and be that mom for her and really look out for her and take over. And it's something that Emma took really, really seriously, as we'll learn throughout the story. She always watched out for Lizzie, and it just kind of seemed like anything Emma felt or liked or wanted or disliked, Lizzie followed suit. And I mean, that's a lot of pressure because Emma was only 12 years old, but I can see her taking it like so seriously and just really always holding on to that, because at that age you're just so impressionable, and it's kind of like where you're still a little bit flexible to being like really proud to take on that role and not seeing that that's actually a lot of pressure to have on little shoulders. I've got this, I'm gonna raise this 2-year-old as my own. But then when you're older and you think back on it, you're just like, yeah, probably shouldn't have had that much responsibility. So it's about 3 years that they're in that role, and Andrew is still, you know, killing it in his business. They do that for about 3 years. It's just the three of them. But then Andrew ends up meeting a woman named Abby DeFree Gray, and they end up getting married, and she becomes Lizzie and Emma's stepmom. So she had no children prior, so these were the only kids that she knew. You'll see a lot in movies that redo the Lizzie Borden story. They really depict Abby as kind of like the wicked evil stepmother. But when you kind of look into the history and learn a little bit more about her, it sounds like she was completely opposite of that and just given a really uncomfortable situation to enter. It sounds to me like almost like Emma had the feeling like her toes were being stepped on. I mean, she was just like a kid. She was a teenager at that point when Abby met their father, and I think she saw it as like her coming in and trying to take over and replace her, because Emma essentially was like the lady of the house and helping her dad so much with Lizzie and had that parental role and responsibility, and she was proud of it. But from what I've researched and read and just kind of seen for myself, it sounds like Abby really just did want to have a connection with them and was just constantly faced with defiance and just like pushback, and just was never able to just get that bond that she really wanted with the girls. That kind of feels like what makes the most sense to me, because there was a period of time where Emma ended up actually going away to school, and during that time Lizzie and Abby were able to have that bonding time, and it seems like they both really enjoyed it. Apparently there were letters that were sent back and forth between Lizzie and Emma, where Lizzie refers to her as mother. She's talking about kind of like the fun things that they did and cooked and what she was learning from her. So it seems like in that brief period of time, she was really enjoying it. And then it wasn't until Emma came back where she started getting the idea of Abby as being somebody that was after their father's money, somebody who was trying to replace their mother and come in and take over the household. And Lizzie was so young, so it seems like that part of her brain wouldn't have been able to like connect that deviousness to anything. She was just enjoying that time with her and not looking deeper into it. And I mean, Lizzie never even knew their mother, so essentially that would have been the only mother that she ever really would have had, where Emma did. Allegedly, Lizzie felt like very neglected growing up. She wanted her father's attention. She was quite close with her father, and I think really enjoyed that time with him. But he was a businessman and he was very successful, and what comes with that is that you're absent a lot. So I think that she kind of felt a little bit resentful for probably more Andrew, but put a lot of that on Abby. Lizzie was quite the shoplifter. She was a bit of a klepto, and everybody around town knew it. So there would be specifically one store that she would always like hit and steal from, and I don't know if in her mind she just thought that she was really good, because the store owner would tell all of the employees and clerks, listen, if Lizzie comes in and takes something, just like make a note of whatever it is and then just put it on Andrew Borden's tab, and when he comes in he's just gonna pay it. So he would just do that for her, and I don't know if he ever said anything. It doesn't sound like he ever said anything to Lizzie. It's almost like he was just like, oh, just let her think that she's a good shoplifter. It's all she's got right now. So she just kept doing it, and it was just known that he would pay for it. So I don't know if she did it kind of to get attention. I don't know if she knew he was paying for it, but it sounds like she was almost wanting to get caught. So maybe that's why she kept doing it, because she was like, damn it, like I'm so good, no one's catching me. I need attention from my dad and I'm not getting it. Which I think is something in itself too, to just show how people care in like the capacity that they're able to, and that we all have like different views and emotions of what like that love looks like, because Andrew was really, really frugal. We know this. So for him, it's almost like that would have been probably a tough pill to swallow, to constantly be paying for these things that Lizzie was stealing, but he loved her, so he did it. And for her, she was probably wanting to have that love in a different way, regardless of whether she knew that he was doing this or not. She was seeking like attention from him and time spent, but for him it was showing it in a different way. Like he's providing, he's paying it off for you, and that's how he's showing his love. So even though a lot of the stories that you hear about Andrew and Abby kind of show them as, you know, her being like this evil stepmother and him being so frugal and not caring to provide like a really good life for the girls, when you just kind of dig a little deeper, you can kind of see that they weren't really like that at all, and they loved and did things in their own ways and capacities, but that they did really care about the girls. Delving a little bit more into Andrew's frugality, is that a word? Is, like I mentioned, the house that they lived in. So you had like the lower class, middle class, upper class. They could have afforded to live in the upper class, but they ended up purchasing a house in the middle class area of Fall Rivers. The address was 230 2nd Street, and this house is apparently a big cause of all of these like conflicts and tension between the girls and Andrew and Abby. We know that Andrew had a lot of money, so they could have afforded to live on like the hill, and that's where Lizzie and Emma really wanted to be. They had cousins up there, they'd seen the lifestyle, and they knew that their father could provide that for them but didn't. So I think that they were really resentful for that. They were entitled and saw this life that they could have, and they were kind of like just stuck living in the middle class. So you'll read a lot that he was so frugal that they didn't have running water in there or electricity, and that doesn't seem to necessarily be true. It kind of sounds like when they went in, there weren't some of those things, and as that kind of became available within households, they upgraded and were able to have like some of those luxuries. But the girls really focused on the location and the fact that the house was quite small and very narrow, and everybody was kind of on top of each other in the house. The layout of the house was very peculiar. So the bedrooms were upstairs, and there weren't really like hallways. It was all connected. So once you got upstairs, everybody's room was connected through doors. And although that feels very personal and tight-knit, everybody's doors were locked, and you could only get to certain doors by entering in different ends of the houses, if that makes sense. So Andrew and Abby's room was entered through one side of the house, and then Lizzie and Emma's area of the bedrooms was entered through the opposite end of the house, and then they would kind of like join together on that floor. So very odd, not spacious, and not what the girls obviously wanted to be living in. And I think they also felt like those conditions prevented them from excelling in their life further and not just living at home with their parents, because they were in their 30s and they were still living at home. Back in those days, that was pretty much unheard of. Like if you were still living at home at 30, there was something wrong with you. You were damaged goods. No suitor would ever want you, so you were pretty much not gonna get married at that point in most people's eyes if you weren't already. So here they are, still living at home with their parents, feeling entitled and feeling like it's that kind of their fault that they weren't able to grow and blossom into this luxurious and lavish lifestyle that they really wanted. And then in 1887, Andrew goes and essentially bails out one of Abby's, I believe it was like a step-sibling. And the story is that the house that they were living in was going to go in foreclosure, and that would leave them homeless. So what Andrew did to save the situation, he ended up buying the house and putting it in Abby's name and having her sister continue to live there. And this made Emma and Lizzie lose their shit. This is apparently the staple situation that kind of led to everything unfolding. And I'm unsure. I think it's like a compilation of things that could kind of lead to that. My view on it is sometimes when you hear about this story, it's explained that it happened very, very close, like days before this crime took place, and that's not the case. This was a couple years before, but it was significant. It did shape the rest of that family. From what is reported by people who knew them very well, is that from that moment on, the girls never referred to Abby as mother again. I don't think Emma ever did. And from that incident forward, Lizzie stopped calling Abby mother and referred to her as Mrs. Borden. They stopped eating meals together as a family as well, which in that day and time is a really big deal. What Andrew wanted to do was kind of diffuse the situation a little bit. He thought, okay, if they're really upset about this whole like property and house thing, I'm gonna just get them a house. and there was a property that used to be their grandfather's that Andrew had as a rental property. So what he ended up doing was changing his name from the title to Lizzie and Emma's. I think they ended up like buying it from him for like $1 or something like that. And so he thought that that would kind of like smooth it over. Now they have their own property and everybody can kind of be okay. Eventually, though, the girls ended up selling the property back to their father for a couple $1,000s. So, I mean, like, decent business move, I guess, on their part. Like, throw a tantrum and then just, like, sell him back the property. Anyways, it must have not been, obviously, what the girls wanted. I don't know if maybe they didn't like being landlords, having that responsibility. I wasn't able to kind of see what Andrew had put on the girls. If it was kind of like, here's the property and it's all up to you. So, any complaints, anything that these tenants need, you have to deal with. So in my mind, that's kind of how I can kind of see that going, that they were just like, this isn't even worth it. You can have this back. We don't want to do this anymore. So they ended up selling the property back to their father. And then in 1890, it seems like Andrew was probably feeling really guilty with hearing the girls feel like they weren't experiencing the life that they knew that their family had. They weren't privy to. This was constantly being revisited and focused on. So what Andrew does is he sends Lizzie on an 11-week trip to Europe with her cousins. And he's like, yo, you know, like just go live it up, have a blast, go see Europe, which was probably a huge deal back then. I mean, nowadays it's a really big deal. So back in the 1800s, an 11-week trip to Europe, I'm sure, was quite expensive. And I don't know what Andrew was thinking. Like, to me, it was so obvious to be like, oh, that's just supposed to make it all better when she gets home. Like, no, she's gonna come back and be like, okay, I'm coming back to this house. I just got to see, like, even further evidence of this lifestyle that I want so badly. And now I've bonded even more with these cousins of mine. And I'm waking up in my bedroom on top of everybody else's upstairs in this narrow little house. So that's what happens. It completely backfires, and then Lizzie is more focused than ever on having this lifestyle that she so desperately wants. And then not long after she returns home, Abby and Andrew are out of town, and there is a robbery that happens at the house. And at the time, the only people that were there were Lizzie, Emma, and their housekeeper, Bridget Sullivan. Now, sometimes in stories, you'll hear the housekeeper be referred to as Maggie. Emma and Lizzie called her Maggie. I've heard conflicting stories on this. I've heard that it's just what the girls called her. But then I've also read that Maggie was a housekeeper that they used to have, and that Emma and Lizzie couldn't be bothered to learn Bridget's real name. So they just called her Maggie because that's what the other housekeeper's name was. Allegedly, Bridget wanted to quit working at the Borden house, and Abby was the one who like begged her to stay and actually ended up giving her a raise out of her own pocket because she felt like that was like the only kindness she was receiving in the house. It's almost like Bridget was just somebody who she could escape to for a little bit and have like human interaction that wasn't an angsty stepdaughter always at you constantly. So Bridget ends up staying, and then Abby and Andrew are gone, and it's just the three girls in the house, and there's like a daytime robbery. So when the police come and investigate, Lizzie's the one who's like giving them the tour, and the robberies happened in Andrew and Abby's bedroom, and everything that was taken was Abby's. There was a pocket watch taken that was supposed to be a gift from Abby's family. There was some money that was taken as well, and some gold that she had in there. But one thing that's really suspicious about the Borden house is that they were over the top cautious about locking doors always. Everybody knew this about the Bordens. It was like one of those weird things of the house. They were constantly communicating with each other. Oh, I've locked this door, don't worry. I don't know if I locked this door, can you go double check? And then they would like triple check. So the police come and investigate, and then they see Lizzie comes and shows them that there's almost like a nail that's like sticking into the door to get to Abby and Andrew's bedroom. But like I said, the layout of this house was so awkward, and there was no hallways. There would have been no way for this person to go like completely undetected unless they really knew the layout, knew the Borden house. But then it doesn't explain the fact of how they would have got in the first place and then gone up the right flight of stairs and found the right bedroom and knew there was gold there. Like, it didn't make sense to anybody. So there's an investigation done, and then Andrew and Abby come back, and Andrew ends up actually just calling off this investigation. He goes and he tells the police, don't keep looking into this. What people speculate is that Andrew Borden knew that nobody had actually broken into his house, which would make sense given how cautious he was all the time about keeping things locked. You'd think that if he actually believed that an outsider had come in, he would want this person found because he's already suspicious of people coming in the home. So it was a big deal that he's just stopped looking. And what people say is that from this moment forward, whenever he would leave, he would lock his bedroom door, and then he would actually take the key and leave it on a mantle in the sitting room. And this was supposed to kind of be a message, almost like, Lizzie, I know you did this, and I dare you to do it again. You're not fooling me. Here's the key. Go at it and see what happens if this happens again. Given all of these issues and factors that are just kind of like bubbling and brewing in this house, and kind of tension and almost underlying threats, you can tell shit is going down in this Borden house. You can probably cut the tension with a knife in that place, and it's just becoming a really uncomfortable environment. Add even further insult to injury, a few weeks before Andrew and Abby Borden were killed, they had a barn on their property. And in this barn, they had pigeons. Lizzie Borden was a huge animal activist. She really, really loved animals. And she had this attachment, allegedly, to these pigeons that were in this barn. She would go and she would feed them and talk to them. But a couple weeks before the incident, Andrew apparently went into the barn and he ended up killing all of the pigeons. And he brought some of them into the house, had them in the kitchen, and Lizzie ended up coming down into the kitchen and she sees that these pigeons are there, headless. Some people say that Lizzie asked Andrew what happened and where are their heads, and that he said that he twisted and popped them off. Other people say that he ended up cutting them off with a hatchet, and then they say that he did that and wanted Lizzie to see it, kind of like a message to her, taking things away from her that she cares about. But then there's the other side of the coin where people see a very innocent explanation, and that is there were boys that would break into the barn and they would taunt these pigeons and throw rocks at them and torture them, which is f***ed up. And so Andrew wanted to put a stop to that, but he also wanted to put a stop to people coming on his property, breaking into his barn. So it said that he ended up doing that to just prevent the boys from coming back, and then he had the pigeons in the kitchen for Bridget to make a stew for the family. Again, nothing is ever going to be able to be confirmed about what really went down, but that is like a huge focus on the story and kind of what leaded up to things. On August 3rd, Lizzie's uncle John Morse ends up coming to the house to stay the night and spend some time with the family. And John is Sarah's brother, but he ended up staying very close with John throughout the years. Some people say that they ended up having like some business together, and that Andrew really respected John and his opinions. Even when he would have other business dealings, he would contact him and just ask for his advice. So that relationship always stayed very strong, and he was a regular visitor of the house. He kind of sounds a little bit like a wanderlust. It sounds like he liked to be around like friends and family a lot, so he never really stayed put, but he was very successful and well off. I think he just liked to like socialize and get out of the house. So he comes to the Borden house, and he says when he gets there, Andrew and Abby are there. I believe they had a meal together or maybe like a snack, but they were socializing and hanging out and catching up. And he said that Lizzie was not there. He didn't see Lizzie. And at the time, Emma was actually out of town and she was visiting friends. So it turns out that he didn't end up seeing Lizzie because Lizzie was actually at her friend Alice's house. And Alice Russell is a really great friend of Lizzie's, and they were just hanging out at her place. And she said that that night, Lizzie ended up kind of expressing that she was feeling really depressed and off. And she kept having this feeling that something terrible was going to happen to her family, specifically her father, because of business dealings that he was dealing with. And she was worried about him. So Alice is like, okay, well, where is this coming from? And she's like, oh, weird things are happening. I think maybe somebody's trying to poison us because we all got really sick yesterday. Allegedly, the night before that, the entire Borden household had come down with like some illness. So Lizzie had said that Abby and Andrew had gotten quite ill after eating and they were throwing up. And then her story was like very conflicting about herself. She said that she had thrown up, and then she said that she didn't, but she was feeling sick, but that wasn't quite like throwing up, but then she did. So Alice is just kind of like, okay, like what? And then she said that she thought Bridget had gotten sick too. So they're kind of trying to figure out how that could have happened. And then Lizzie's kind of giving suggestions. She says that she thinks somebody's poisoning the milk that's outside of their house. And Alice is kind of like, are you sure? And then she starts suggesting that it could be somebody who had bad business dealings with Andrew. And she said that not long before, she had overheard a gentleman come to the house and him and Andrew were talking. And it sounds like there was like a little bit of a business disagreement and they had a bit of a falling out. And Andrew asked him to leave and get out of the house. And Alice is like, okay, well, who is it? And she's like, I don't know. I was upstairs. I don't know. It's just like something I heard. So, okay, Alice just like takes that at face value and it is what it is. And so they had like about a 2-hour visit, she said. And then Lizzie goes back home and she goes to bed. So on the morning of August 4th, everybody wakes up and they all kind of come down at different times. So John says he comes down and he has breakfast with Abby and Andrew. And that's around like 7 a.m. And they sat and they talked for a little while. And then he says like around 8:45, he ends up heading out. And what's very specific about him leaving as well is he recalls Andrew coming with him so that he can, again, lock the door and make sure that it's locked behind him while he goes out for the day. So John Morse leaves and he ends up going to visit a niece that also lives in town and spend some time there and run a few errands that he had to do as well. So then Abby and Bridget end up having a conversation kind of about like what needs to be done throughout the day. And Abby asks Bridget to please clean the windows inside and out. She said they were really, really filthy and that was like kind of what she wanted her to tackle that day. So Bridget said she was going to work on that and that when she had seen Abby, she was just kind of doing some light dusting around the house. And then she sees Lizzie come down around 8:50 for breakfast and they have a little chat. She asks Lizzie if she wants her to make anything or what she's going to have. And Lizzie's like, oh, I don't really know if I'm going to have anything. I might have a coffee and a molasses cookie. So Bridget's like, okay, well, let me know. And then she just kind of like starts to go around the house to gather things that she needs to prepare to clean the windows. 15 minutes after this, Andrew Borden ends up leaving the house. He's going to go get a shave and run some errands. And of course, he locks the door behind him. And then Lizzie and Bridget end up having a really brief conversation. And Lizzie comes down and she asks Bridget if she's going to be out cleaning the windows. And Bridget's like, yeah, bro, that's what I'm doing here. She just felt like it needed to be brought up that Lizzie was like, so you're just gonna be out there cleaning the windows? Yeah, so I'm gonna be out here. And then she thought maybe she wanted to know, since everybody was always like so concerned about where everybody was and what was locked and what wasn't, she said, if you'd like, you can lock the door while I'm doing my thing out here and I'll just use the barn water to finish what I need to do instead of coming back in and out from the kitchen. But you don't really need to lock it because I'm gonna be outside. I'm gonna be keeping an eye on things. But if it makes you more comfortable, then I'll just use the barn. So as she's cleaning the windows, she's chatting with neighbors and she's able to see into the house because she's obviously washing the windows and she doesn't see anybody. So she says she's like kind of going back like 3 or 4 times on different trips from the barn to get more water to clean out there. So she's out there for quite a while. But then she hears when she's at one of the screen doors, somebody like struggling to unlock the front door. And it sounds like there was like 3 different locks for this door. So she's like trying to undo like the spring lock and then it's still locked. So you needed like a key to try to unlock that other lock, and she was having like a little bit of a struggle. So I guess she was kind of like, because she actually sees that on the other side of the door it's Andrew Borden and he's come back because he's not feeling well and he can't get into his own house. So she says that while she's trying to get Andrew in the house, she hears Lizzie up the stairs having a giggle that she's having such a tough time and muttering under her breath. So she was very adamant and persistent on the fact that she did hear Lizzie. She knew it was her laugh and she could hear it kind of coming up from up the stairs. So Bridge gets Andrew in finally and he gets into the house and Lizzie's there and he says he's come back early because he's just not feeling well. Bridget also had like reported that she still wasn't feeling well throughout the day from the night before. And so he just wanted to have like a little bit of a rest and try to recuperate. And Bridget says she remembers Lizzie and Andrew having a little bit of a chat and she overhears him ask Lizzie where Abby is. And Lizzie replies, oh, yeah, she got a letter. One of her friends is sick, so she's just in town going to like check up on her. And then it kind of sounds like nothing further was discussed. I don't think he asked about it or anything. And so he goes up to his bedroom to get something and then he ends up making his way back down to the sitting area and has a rest on the couch. And then Bridget ends up seeing Lizzie gathering her things to start ironing in the dining room. And then Lizzie ends up asking Bridget if she's going to be going out again for the day. And Bridget's like, I don't know, maybe I will, maybe I won't. I'm really not feeling well, so I think I'm gonna have a rest. And then Lizzie says, okay, well, like, if you do end up going out, make sure that you lock the door. I might go out later, and right now Mrs. Borden is out because she got a note that one of her friends is sick. And then Bridget was like, oh my God, like, who's sick? And Lizzie's like, I don't know. She told me she got a note and she left, and that's all I know. And then Lizzie's like, oh, funny, I forgot to mention they're having a sale on fabric at Sargent's. It's like 8 cents a yard if you want to go and like check it out. Bridget's like, yeah, maybe later once I'm done having like a nap. I'm just really not feeling well. So at that point, she actually ends up just going up to her room to have a nap because she's starting to just feel even sicker after being outside, like washing the windows all morning. Bridget goes upstairs and she says she's not up there very long. Where she's located, and especially like within those houses too, you can hear everything. You know, every creak. You can hear when people are coming in and out of the house. So she had gotten very accustomed to the sounds and movements of the house and everybody that lived inside of it. She said that there was nothing that like really stuck out to her. She didn't hear any bangs or commotions or anything significant, but she did end up hearing the city hall bell ring, and then she looked at her clock and it was 11 o'clock. From her recollection, she thinks it was only about 10 or 15 minutes after she hadn't even really dozed off or gone into a sleep. She hears Lizzie scream for her and she's like, oh my God, Maggie, come down here quick. Somebody's broken in and they've killed father. So Bridge shoots out of bed, and Andrew Borden is laying on the couch that he went to go rest on, and his face is completely bludgeoned. It's pretty much unrecognizable. It was just like a really, really brutal scene. So Bridget's like, oh my God, like what happened? Did you see anything, Lizzie? She's like, no, I need you to go and get the doctor. And conveniently, the doctor lived across the street. So she runs and she goes to get the doctor, and it seems Lizzie's kind of like frantically pacing. And one of the neighbors, I don't know, she must kind of be one of those neighbors that's just like always lurking or something, because she ended up seeing all of this go down. I just imagine like the neighbor in Bewitched when I was researching this, always out there looking, and then like shit finally goes down and you're like, this is my moment. Like I knew something was going on over there. That's what she get, like the impression she gives me. And her name's Adelaide. So Adelaide sees like kind of like a commotion, so she's like watching even like more, you know, intently. And then she sees Lizzie come to the front screen door and she's like, what's going on, Lizzie? And she's like, oh my God, like Adelaide, you have to come here. Someone's broken in and someone's killed father. So she heads over. Lizzie's asking, like, did you see somebody leave? She's like, no. Did you see anything? She's like, no. I was in the barn and I ended up just kind of hearing a groan. And so I came in and I just saw my dad like this. Which is worth noting because Bridget was in the house and she said like she heard nothing. The only thing she heard was like the church bell. So somebody who's in the barn outside of the house, for them to hear a groan that loud, you'd figure Bridget would have heard it. And then she also tells the neighbor, oh my God, you know what? Even earlier, I think that I heard Abby come home. We need to find her. We need to see if she's in the house and see if she's okay. Somebody go look for Abby. So at this point, everybody's just kind of congregating and the doctor's arriving, and Alice ends up getting word of what's going on too and heads over to comfort Lizzie. And Lizzie keeps dropping these hints to everybody to go and see if Abby's in the house because she thinks that she heard her come home, which is important too, because if you think you heard her come home, then you go look for her. You would know where she is. So finally, a very reluctant Bridget and Adelaide, of course Adelaide, she's like, I got this, guys. So they end up going up the stairs, and the way that the Borden house is set up is that when you're going up the stairs, it's almost like when you get to a certain point, you're level with the floor and you can see the floor leading into the bedroom. So if you just turn to the side, you'd be eye level with that bedroom floor. So Bridget and Adelaide are ascending the staircase and they see a figure on the ground, and instantly they both know gotta be Abby. But Adelaide actually ends up up going back down the stairs. She didn't want to see it at all. And Bridget just carries on into the bedroom to get like a further look to make sure that this is Abby. And sure enough, Abby is on the floor of the guest bedroom. And she also was bludgeoned in the back of her head and on the ground dead. When Abby and Andrew's bodies are eventually looked over, their injuries are consistent with something like a hatchet or an axe. Abby was hit 19 times and Andrew was hit 11 times. It kind of looked like Abby was up in the guest room because she was just retidying it for John because he was going to be coming back and spending the night again. And then the way that she was found, it seemed like whoever this was came from behind. Like there was no frontal injuries, there were no defensive wounds. It was just completely caught off guard. Same goes for Andrew too. I think he obviously was sleeping just based on the position that he was found. And again, there was no form of defense. Everything was just very consistent in the same spot on the side of his face. So the police arrive and they start their investigation, and there was actually it sounds like quite a few investigations. The way they did things back then are so different from the way that they do them now. Now, if you have a crime scene, it's immediately secured. Well, for the most part. I mean, on this channel, we know like there's a repeat of fuck ups all the time, so there was no shortage of them then. But for the most part, if something happens, you should secure the crime scene, get everybody out, make sure that you collect all of your evidence before ever releasing it back. But it sounds like they kind of kept coming back and forth on different days. All the while, everybody was still living in the house. Anyways, on that first one, they come and they do their questioning. Lizzie obviously gives the same story that she's been giving, that she was in the barn, heard a groan, came in, found her father, and that was pretty much it. So they say they're gonna, search the house. And then Lizzie's like, oh, don't be alarmed, but when you get to the cellar, I've got some cloths that are just soaking in a bin right now and they're full of blood. But it's cool because I'm menstruating right now. And that was it. That was the extent of those cloths in the cellar that were soaked with blood and any investigation for that. And it just goes to kind of remind you about the times, because back in the day, that would have been a very forward and uncomfortable statement for a woman to make to a man, let alone, oh, it's gonna be there and you're gonna see it. They were just like, okay, yeah, cool. We'll stay the fuck away from that. So while they're there that first day, they ask very standard questions. Where were you? Did you hear anything? Who might have done this, all that stuff. And Lizzie, she starts to kind of contradict herself a little bit with stories that she's like kind of laid out from the day prior and into that day. She's not really able to give clear, precise details of exactly where she was and when. The only thing that she kind of keeps saying is that she was in the barn and heard this groan. But when investigators went out into the barn, there was sawdust in there. And when they looked at it, nothing was disturbed. So it wasn't adding up with that area of where she said she was and like her account. There was nothing like shuffled about, that somebody was just like freshly there. It looked like nobody had been standing on it at all. And then you'd assume too, like if you heard like a commotion or something that concerned you enough to leave abruptly, with a dress, have that kind of shuffled and kicked and dragged about a little bit, and there was nothing like that on Lizzie. Another thing that was missing from Lizzie is there was no blood either. Detectives asked Bridget when she came down and Lizzie had called for her, did you see anything? Was there anything suspicious on her clothes or her face or her hands? And she's like, no, there was nothing at all. Same question for Adelaide. She didn't notice anything suspicious on Lizzie either. So that, I think, is the biggest question with this case, because the way that Abby and Andrew were killed was so aggressive. There was a lot of rage and anger to carry something like that out. So whoever did that would have signs of blood on them, and Lizzie just didn't. So the police do their first search, and then they end up just releasing the house back, and everybody's allowed to stay there. So that first night, John ended up staying, and Alice did too, because she wanted to be there for Lizzie. So she spends the night, and then what I think is really creepy is that like the bodies were there as well. And they've also ended up assigning a police officer to like stand post outside and make sure nobody comes back to the house, because at this point they're wanting to believe that this has to be some deranged psychopath and not somebody that's like a member of the family. So they want to make sure that they're keeping an eye on anything suspicious, and that whoever this could have been isn't gonna come back and finish the job and get like the rest of the people that were in the house. So this guard is standing outside, and then he's able to see when it gets darker out, you can see when lights go on within a house and then kind of get like a clear view. So he ends up seeing around like 8 o'clock that night, that Lizzie and Alice end up going to the cellar, and they are standing at the sink, and Alice is holding a lantern for Lizzie, and she's cleaning up what we now know is a bedpan, and then the light goes upstairs, and then they retire to their bedroom. So the story behind that is Lizzie needed to go and clean her bedpan, and then Alice was like, well, I'll do it for you. You don't have to do that right now. Like, you've had a day. This is the last thing that you need to be worrying about. And Lizzie's like, no, it's cool. I'll do it. And Alice was like, okay, well, if you're gonna go, then at least I'll come in and I'll keep you company and I'll hold this lantern for you, and then you're not by yourself. And for me, I would be like sourcing my friend, hey, can you come with me? I don't want to be alone in the cellar to clean this by myself when my parents were just murdered here today. So Lizzie's like, yeah, okay, sure, come. So then that's what the officer ended up seeing. And then they go back upstairs, and then they weren't sleeping in the same bedroom. Alice ended up actually sleeping in Andrew and Abby's room, which is weird enough, but that's where she was. And then Lizzie was in her bedroom. So they say goodnight, and Alice goes into the bedroom, and then the officer sees, like, about 15 minutes later, Lizzie goes back down to the cellar again, and he can kind of like see her back at the sink. He doesn't really see what she's doing or what she has, but she's kind of like rummaging around doing something, and then goes back upstairs. In the morning, like, he asks Alice about it. He's like, why did she go back down there? And she's like, oh no, I went with her. We just had to do this. No big deal. I was there too. And he's like, yeah, but then she went back after. And then I think Alice starts to get, okay, weird. So the officer obviously makes note of this, and these are just more pieces that are kind of stacking against Lizzie. One of the main things that I think for me too, I'm always so concentrated on is this note that she says that Abby ended up getting about a sick friend. And so the police start asking a lot about that too. They're like, hey, like, we gotta find this friend. We need to narrow down a time that if Abby left, what time she came home. Because when they started investigating the areas and the bodies, the blood evidence, they started figuring out that Abby was killed about 90 minutes before Andrew was. So she had died first. Her blood was already like starting to like harden and get tacky. Whereas when they found Andrew, it was a very, very fresh still. And some people even reported that it was still secreting. So they're trying to like narrow down, did she leave? Did she not? What's happened here? Who's this friend? We need more information. And Lizzie can't give them any. She's, well, I don't know. This is just what she told me. And they're like, okay, well, did you see the note? And she said, no. Well, how do you know she got a note? Then she says that Abby told her that she did. But there's no note on Abby. There's no note around this house. Nobody can find any sign of this note or a friend that's sick. And they actually end up putting out a $5,000 reward. In the 1800s, $5,000 is a huge, huge deal. And nobody ever came forward. No one ever claimed that reward. And no one ever found a note. And this turned into a media frenzy. This was a huge, huge deal. A lot of people ended up coming and surrounding the house. There was reports saying that at times there were like 2,000 people that were in the town because they wanted to take a look at the house and see like where this double murder happened. So this was like a circus. And the next day after the murders take place, there's an article that is written, and a pharmacist named Eli Bentz was interviewed, and he claimed that Lizzie Borden had been in his pharmacy the day before the killings, and she had asked for prussic acid. And she said that she was trying to clean a sealskin cape. He was like, hell no. That's fucking fishy. I've never heard of it being used like that before, and I can't give that to you without a prescription. So no. Like, police are seeing things like this, and they're trying to narrow down a suspect. They obviously had a few suspects, starting with John Morse, but all of John's alibis like completely checked out. He was visiting family, so they were all able to put him where he said he was. He was also running errands, and people had seen him around the town. So John was off the list. It obviously couldn't have been Emma. Although she lived there, she was not there at the time. She was visiting friends away for a couple weeks. They reportedly did suspect Bridget for a very brief period of time, but they just couldn't connect those dots for her. She had no motive, and when you looked at the crime, it was really, really really intense, and there was a lot of rage, and nothing that they could connect into that household or that relationship between Bridget and Abby and Andrew would merit some rage like that on her employers. So then that leaves them with Lizzie or somebody who broke in and just randomly did this. With Lizzie, everybody knew that she didn't get along with her stepmom, so there was already that fractured relationship. And then when it came to her father, although she did love and respect him, there was a financial gain there for her if he wasn't in the way anymore, and she obviously was really unhappy with her living conditions and wanted to like level up. 3 days after, Alice is at the house. By this time, Emma's arrived back. So Emma and Lizzie are in the kitchen and Lizzie's burning a dress. And so Alice comes in and she's like, "What are you doing?" And Lizzie tells her, "Oh, I have paint all over this dress. Nobody can get it out. It's unfixable. I'm just over it." So Alice starts to express concern, and I don't really specifically know if it was, I think she did this, but it sounds like she so badly wanted to like be a supportive friend and just let Lizzie know like probably shouldn't be doing this, because regardless of whether this is paint or not, like this is just a suspicious, fishy situation that we're in right now. Parents were just murdered, and who am I to say that this isn't the outfit you were wearing? So she's feeling uncomfortable, and she's feeling like in a really weird position. And behind the scenes, all the investigators also like honing in on Lizzie, but what they're really looking for is a murder weapon. On one of these return investigations, they start searching the house and they make their way to the cellar. Again, this is also conflicting. So some reports are that they had already done a sweep of the cellar and they had found like any weapons that they thought were going to match the wounds to Abby and Andrew's injuries. So what they're looking for is like an axe or something of that shape. They're thinking something like that is all that could have made this kind of damage. One of their previous investigations, they had already collected everything in the house that looks like it would have fit those injuries, and that nothing that they had collected did. So they went back to the cellar, and then this time in like this one little toolbox that was kind of just pushed aside and looked like wasn't really anything at all, they find the head of this hatchet, and it's missing its handle. It's just the head of the hatchet, but it looks like it's a clean break on it. It looks like the wood was split very recently, and the investigators swear that they had never seen it there before. And another thing that's suspicious about this hatchet is it almost looked like it was made to look like dull and insignificant. It had like ash rubbed all over it. So it's almost like somebody was trying to make it look like it wasn't freshly used or like new, and that it was just like dusty and just like tossed away and it was broken and no one used it. And I think that there's like two significant things about that. One being that it's ash and it's not dust and it's supposed to like look like it's just old. The second being that I haven't read too many reports and seen this mentioned before, but I have in one article and it fascinated me. And what it was that there was almost like a coating on like hatchets and it was gold, maybe to give it like the illusion that it was a fancy hatchet. I don't know. So it had this coating on it. And when the medical examiner was looking at Abby's injuries, there was notes that there were gold flecks embedded in Abby's skull. So I thought that was really, really interesting that she had it. And another interesting thing was Andrew didn't have any of those flakes. And that would make sense if, you know, this isn't real gold. This is just like a little painting on it. Given the severity of what Abby went through, it would make sense that there was just like none of that remaining anymore. And then it also makes sense of why somebody would want to make something look a little bit more aged than it actually was by like scraping stuff off. Maybe that's what she was doing down in the basement when she went back after Alice went to bed. So yeah, now they find the hatchet. They've got the weapon that they think they need. They're pretty much ready to close in on Lizzie Borden, but they decide to do like a 3-day inquest to see if there's enough to bring forward to actually charge Lizzie with murder. When they question Lizzie, she's all over the place. None of her stories are consistent. Everything is constantly changing, and she can't pinpoint details that you would be very specific and concrete about if you didn't have anything to hide. She didn't know if she was upstairs when her dad came home, or if she was downstairs. She's obviously not wanting to put herself upstairs, but Bridget is so adamant that she heard her laugh from upstairs. So she's like, oh, maybe that was when I was really quickly just putting my clothes upstairs. I don't really remember being up there though, but it could have been then. And I just like came down quickly, but I don't think I was up there, and I was spending my time in the kitchen, but she couldn't say how long she was in the kitchen or the dining room. Her story was inconsistent about the time that she said that she went to the barn, and everything was just kind of overlapping because at the time that Abby's murder would have happened, there would have been like a really significant thud on the ground. She wasn't a slight woman. She wasn't very petite. So you would have heard her body hit the floor. And Bridget obviously was outside cleaning the windows, so she didn't hear anything. But she remembers Lizzie being in the house. And I think it was when she couldn't remember like very key details that you should remember that she really sealed her fate. She also couldn't remember if she had breakfast that day, which is like a very simple question. Like, did you eat breakfast? Yes or no? Especially if it's like a significant date, I'm going to remember exactly what I ate that day because I'm probably not going to want to eat it again for a while because I'm going to be a little bit traumatized about it. I remember this time when I was like 5 years old. I was watching Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer one night. I ended up eating a caramel blizzard that we had from Dairy Queen. I was wearing this little nightgown pajama set with bluish sleeves, and then they had a penguin on it. That evening, I woke up and I threw up more than I ever had in my entire life. I've never seen that much throw up. I don't think I ever will again. And I remember so many distinct details from that day because it was pretty traumatizing. To this day, I will not eat a caramel ice cream sundae from Dairy Queen ever again. Like, I still to this day have not had one. So when you can't answer from 3 days before, do you remember what you had to eat? These should be very simple questions to answer. Another story that I came across, I haven't heard too much about, but I also think is very questionable, is that on one of Lizzie's accounts of what happened, she said that she came down once Andrew had gotten home when they were having their chat, and as they were talking, she was removing his boots and putting his slippers on. If you look at the crime scene photos, Andrew's still wearing his boots. Another story that Lizzie makes that she can't explain. So it's all of these types of things that lead investigators to charge Lizzie with the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden. And in that day, given the severity and the intensity of the murders, nobody wanted to believe that a woman could carry something out like that, let alone a daughter to her father and stepmother. And then her doctor starts coming forward and saying, this was all done so wrong. I've been administering methamphetamines to Lizzie because she's such a mess right now. She's devastated over what happened to her parents. She's not in the right mind frame. So you guys are arresting somebody who's having conflicting stories, but it's because she's confused because she's very heavily sedated right now. Regardless, they end up going to trial. And Lizzie went to this trial armored with the dream team of that century. That's what everybody refers to it as. Essentially, when you look through the story, it's really what it is. I mean, now we're in 2020, and we're still talking about this case and how infamous it is. And that's something that I would assume is probably going to happen with the O.J. Simpson case and his lawyers as well. So this is supposed to be like the OG dream team. And one of her lawyers was Governor Robinson. And what's really significant about him is that in this courtroom, there was a panel of 3 judges and a jury of 6 men because women weren't allowed to be on the jury at that time, so only dudes everywhere. So Governor Robinson had actually appointed one of the judges to be a judge. This was already done 7 years ago, but I mean, obviously they had a close relationship, and if I were that judge, I would kind of feel like connection and I owe my career to this guy. So right off the hop, that's a massive conflict of interest, but it went ahead anyway. And their defense is basically that everything is circumstantial. There's nothing that directly linking Lizzie to these crimes, and that's true. Investigators say they swept through everybody's garments, they went through every aspect of that house and Lizzie's room to make sure that there was no dress that was hidden, that they were missing. So I think that was like one of the biggest holes, that there was nothing specific that was linking Lizzie to this crime. And what prosecutors also had against them was that certain suspicious evidence wasn't allowed to be presented, like Eli Bentz, who was the pharmacist. His story about Lizzie coming in and asking for poison, it wasn't allowed to be presented because they said it was irrelevant. Lizzie's parents were found bludgeoned them to death. And maybe if they had been poisoned, that could have been brought into evidence because it was like, oh, she had already come and tried to get poison from me. I said no. And then maybe she went somewhere else and found poison and then poisoned them. So that would have connected her to this crime. But since the manner of which they died was so different, the jury never heard about it. And everybody says poison is a lady's weapon. Back in that day, nobody can make sense of Lizzie wielding this hatchet. That's really like what they went with. They wanted Lizzie to appear very, very frail and sweet. The courtroom was packed daily. Most of the people that were observing the trial were women. They were very intrigued, which kind of makes me feel better. I think a lot of us true crime junkies are women. So it just kind of reassures me that, you know, our ancestors, this seems to be like a pattern. And even newspapers that would report on this, they would report more on things like what Lizzie was wearing, what she looked like. And one of the days, actually, the prosecutors had presented the actual skulls of Abby and Andrew Borden to trial. And again, there's very conflicting stories of this. One of the stories is that he just mentioned that he had these skulls in the courtroom, and Lizzie actually ended up just fainting at the thought of the skulls being in the same room as her. Another story that I've read is that the skulls were actually tipped over by accident, but they think that the prosecutor did it on purpose, and then Lizzie saw them and fainted. And then another story I've heard is that they were just presented and shown and that Lizzie fainted. What is consistent is that these skulls were in the courtroom and Lizzie fainted. So this made everybody feel even further like she's fainting just thinking about these skulls. Like, how could she have ever done this to somebody? She wouldn't have been able to carry out this act without like fainting or being sick. They do end up bringing the hatchet in as evidence, and they show the jury that it matches the wounds and it's consistent with like the size and shape of the injuries to the skull. And that's pretty much all they have. But again, there's no evidence that links anybody to it. So they just had no leg to stand on. It was like, yeah, it fit, but when you needed further proof, there wasn't any. It was just another dead end for them. They did want to use Alice's testimony about the burning of the dress, but the seamstress, Bridget, and Emma were all able to corroborate Lizzie's story, saying that they did see paint on it. And in fact, Emma was the one who vouched and went on the stand saying that she's the one who asked Lizzie to burn it. So that was her idea. So Lizzie doesn't end up testifying in her trial, and it lasts 13 days. They say that the jurors deliberated for a little over an hour, and allegedly they actually had their mind made up pretty much instantly, but they wanted to kind of make it seem like they were doing their job so nobody would question their decision. So they just kind of like hung out and chilled and just pretended to be talking about the trial. Woo. Somebody just came to my back window and scared the shit out of me. Let's replay that. So it's reported that the jury foreman was like so excited to deliver his verdict that he just like blurted it out. He was like, she's not guilty. He didn't even wait for the judge to be like, yo, have you guys come to a unanimous decision yet? And then they do their thing and they're like, yes, judge, we have. Okay, what say you? So Lizzie was found not guilty, and everybody in the courtroom erupts. Like, they're all excited and they're so happy and they just like cheer, and it's just this big celebration that she's found innocent. So given that reaction, you'd think that that would just be the end of it and Lizzie went on to live her happy little life. And she did essentially do that. She did go on to live her life, but everybody who supported her shunned her after the trial. They were like, yeah, we don't really think you did it. We don't want you to be a killer, but like, I don't want to have you in my house just in case. You know? So that's kind of like how Lizzie lived her life. Her and her sister ended up going back to the house that they lived in very, very briefly. They did end up getting their inheritance from Andrew Borden's estate, and they bought their dream house a few weeks after that trial was over. This was the creme de la creme. They got up on the hill like they always wanted to. This was a 14-bedroom mansion. It had like crystal chandeliers. It had like the porcelain countertops. It was everything they ever wanted. Reportedly, Lizzie had 2 separate wings of the house for like different seasons for her bedroom. So she had like the summer bedroom, and then she had the winter bedrooms. So she was living in luxury like she always wanted to. She ended up calling this property Maplecroft. Although she, you know, got the house that she wanted to and was living in the luxury that she wanted to, the neighbors were not very welcoming to her. Supposedly, the infamous Lizzie Borden took an axe rhyme was created around this time and that the kids in the neighborhood would jump rope and sing this outside of her house. But Lizzie loved going out. Even if she wasn't invited to parties and stuff, she wanted to try to like find an area to insert herself in and socialize and party because that's what she liked to do. Emma was very different. Emma liked just being at home and quiet. And Lizzie wanted to, you know, paint the town red and ooh, I didn't even plan that. But you know, like Lizzie wanted to go out there and party and socialize and meet people. So she really enjoyed going to the theater and she ended up building relationships within that community. Nowadays, celebrities are such a big deal in our world. You know, like if you're invited to Jennifer Lopez's party, that's a big deal. Whereas back in the day, people who were like in the theater and stuff, anybody who was like elite or of like high society, they didn't like mingle with those folks. But that was Lizzie's crowd. She really liked them. They were fun. She got along with them. And she ended up really bonding with an actress named Nance O'Neill. And they became really, really tight. And so from that, a lot of rumors have swirled that she was actually in a relationship with Nance. And Emma and Lizzie grew up very religious. They were members of their church. Lizzie taught Sunday school. And she was a very active member in the women's church. But after the murders happened, those people in her life ended up turning their backs on her. But given the lifestyle that her and Emma had already been involved in like their whole entire lives, you'd assume that having a lesbian relationship in the 1800s when you were really active in the church, that wouldn't fly for a lot of people. So allegedly, this is kind of what was going on behind the scenes. And in 1904, Emma actually ended up moving out of Maplecroft. It was reported that her and Lizzie had a really big falling out, and she ends up moving to New Hampshire, and she never has a relationship with Lizzie again. There is a interview that she did provide, and she wouldn't go into detail, but when they asked, why did you leave? She said that the conditions behind closed doors were becoming so unbearable that she just couldn't do it anymore and she had to leave. She never got into specifics. So of course that could mean a million things. Was it that her sister was having a lesbian relationship with Nance O'Neill and it was making her really, really uncomfortable? We'll never know. So Lizzie and Emma never did speak again, and 20 years had passed. And on June 1st, 1927, Lizzie Borden died. And in a very strange, sad twist of fate, 9 days later, Emma Borden passed away. So it just makes you wonder, like, really what happened, because they grew up so close, and I'm just very, very curious to know what it would have been to not speak to your sister for over 20 years and then get the news that she's gone. Then you pass away not long after. And you've made this promise at the beginning of the story to your mother, who was on her deathbed, that you'd always take care of her and you'd always be there for her. And it's almost like, okay, like she's passed away, I'm good to go now. It's very bizarre and it's very tragic, but it's also strangely endearing. So at the time of their death, Lizzie Borden was worth about $5 million in today's currency. And she left a huge amount of that money to animal organizations. And the remainder of her money was split up and divided between her employees and her helpers that were always around her house that became her new family. We will never ever know what happened. A lot of the theories that swirl around about Lizzie and her motive is basically that she was like having a lot of affairs, but none of them really make sense. So some of them are that she was having an affair with the doctor across the street and didn't want anybody to know about it. And then there was another one about her having an affair with the maid. There's also a theory that there was incest involved and that Andrew was accused of having a very inappropriate relationship with Lizzie. We have absolutely no proof of anything that happened, but for me, I don't see that as being a theory that makes any sense out of all of them, and strictly because I don't think that Andrew's death was planned if Lizzie did do this. He ended up coming home early. He was expected to be gone for the rest of the day. It does make sense that Lizzie, who hated her stepmom, would do what she did to her, and I think that she was just hoping that somebody would find her before her dad even came home. Either the maid or her uncle. There was just something about, I think, Andrew coming home that derailed whatever plan she had in her head, spooked her, and he was like an afterthought and on the fly, which also would not make sense for the pigeon theory, because a lot of people like to talk about her getting so upset with her dad about killing these pigeons. But if he was the target, why would she kill her stepmother in the morning and then like hope nobody finds the body until her dad arrives in the evening and then kill him? You'd kill him if he was pissed at him about the pigeons. And are you really gonna get that raged about these pigeons that you're gonna like bludgeon your stepmother 19 times and him 11? Like there's something more deep rooted if she did it. It wasn't just the pigeons, and I think most of that was just geared towards Abby. And then maybe once that rage unleashed and then he came home early, she was like, well, fuck, here we go. I didn't mean to be like insensitive like that. Do you know what I mean though? Like it was an afterthought. Regardless, we really will never know, and I think that is the fascination with this story and why over 100 years later we're still talking about it. In fact, you can actually go and visit the Lizzie Borden house. It still stands today in Falls River, Massachusetts. I can't say Massachusetts. The house is still there, and it's actually a bed and breakfast. They've got it all decorated like it would have been back in the day. There are crime scene photos decorated throughout the house, and you can sleep there. So naturally, that is on my list to go and visit one of these days. As morbid as it is, I'm very fascinated and curious. I don't know if I could spend the night. I'd probably be pretty like creeped out, but you can probably get my feelers out in there first and like see how I felt. I would love to know your theories about it. I obviously have mine. I love a good mystery discussion. You know this. So leave your theories in the comments so I can read them. If you're still here after this time, you guys, thank you so much. I hope this case was as intriguing for you as it is for me. Like I could just listen and read about and research anything Lizzie Borden forever. That is it for me today. I hope you liked this case. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the absolute world to me. I love and I appreciate you guys so much. Those aren't my strangling hands. Those are my pinchy hands. I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, stay safe, kids. Love each other. Love yourself. And I will see you soon. Bye.